The bitter scent of industrial bleach permeated Marcus Riley's clothing, a pungent reminder of his fall from grace. Slumped on the frigid metal bench, he pulled the oversized orange jumpsuit tighter around his emaciated frame. The courtroom's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like mechanical insects, their harsh glow exposing every crease of defeat etched into his weathered face. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 days without a proper meal had left his stomach twisted into knots of hunger. The half-eaten apple core tossed to him by a sympathetic guard yesterday morning had been his last sustenance. The theft, a dented can of beans and a loaf of day-old bread from the corner market, now hung like a millstone of shame around his neck. Caught red-handed, stammering apologies to the store owner, Marcus had offered no resistance when the police arrived. What explanation could possibly justify his desperation? Now he sat, awaiting judgment, the incessant fluorescent hum drilling into his consciousness. He had constructed invisible walls around himself, blocking out the contemptuous glares of the other detainees. Their jeers and taunts simply dissipated against his shield of indifference. His world had contracted to the confines of his own skin, a prison built from regret and self-loathing. Once he had dreamed of anonymity, of simply fading into the urban landscape. But fate, it seemed, had crafted a crueler design for Marcus Riley. Judge Eleanor Matthews adjusted her reading glasses, allowing the morning light streaming through the high windows to catch the lenses. Her courtroom, with its polished oak panels and sense of order, had always felt like a sanctuary to her, a place where, despite the grinding machinery of bureaucracy, she could still pursue some measure of true justice. 2 decades on the bench had carved lines of wisdom around her intelligent eyes, yet they retained a persistent spark of idealism. This morning's docket was the usual parade of minor infractions: public drunkenness, petty theft, traffic violations, disorderly conduct. Each case revealed another fragment of the city's underbelly, another testament to promises broken and lives adrift. She listened attentively to each defendant, offering guidance, sometimes even a flicker of encouragement. She recognized the inherent value in each person who stood before her, even those who had buried it beneath layers of poor choices. Across the courtroom, Assistant District Attorney Victor Reeves organized his notes with meticulous precision. Marcus Riley was just another name in an endless procession of offenders. To Reeves, he represented nothing more than a statistic, a recidivist draining valuable public resources. Loitering, resisting arrest, public intoxication, and now theft, the man was clearly a parasite on society. Reeves scanned the case file, his mouth compressed into a thin, disapproving line. Each offense reinforced his initial assessment. No mitigating circumstances, no room for leniency. The law was absolute, and enforcing it was his sacred duty. He jotted a note recommending maximum sentencing. Riley was a blight on the community, and Reeves intended to excise him. He mentally rehearsed his opening statement, already envisioning Judge Matthews's approving nod, the swift resolution. Another menace neutralized. A surge of righteous indignation rose within him. This man, this Riley, would not continue to flaunt the law with impunity. In the holding cell, the guard's callous voice shattered Marcus's isolation. "Riley, Marcus." He flinched as though struck. With painful slowness, he pushed himself to his feet, eyes fixed firmly on the floor, shoulders conveying absolute surrender. The fight had abandoned him long ago, leaving behind only a hollow vessel, an echo of his former self. The guard escorted him through sterile corridors, the jangling of his restraints providing a melancholy soundtrack to his journey. The massive courtroom doors loomed ahead, a portal to yet another public humiliation. Marcus steeled himself, preparing to face the inevitable judgment. Judge Matthews announced the next case, her voice clear and authoritative, yet tinged with a subtle weariness. The State versus Marcus Riley. She glanced up, ready to dispense another measured portion of justice. The fluorescent lights hummed, relentlessly, casting their clinical illumination over the worn surface of the defendant's table. Marcus sat hunched, studying a particular whirl in the wooden grain, as though it contained the secrets of the universe. He hadn't once raised his eyes to meet the judge's gaze. The county-issued jumpsuit hung from his frame like a funeral shroud, the coarse fabric chafing against his skin, a constant irritating reminder of his captivity. Victor Reeves rose from his seat, his crisp navy suit a stark contrast to Marcus's disheveled appearance. His voice, amplified by the courtroom's excellent acoustics, sliced through the expectant silence. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, sweeping his confident gaze across the room, pausing briefly to regard Marcus with undisguised contempt. "The State will prove beyond any reasonable doubt that the defendant, Marcus Riley, represents a persistent threat to our community. He has demonstrated consistent disregard for the law, exhibited violent tendencies, and poses a clear danger to public safety and the well-being of law-abiding citizens." Reeves approached the jury box, establishing eye contact with each juror. In turn, the prosecution will present evidence of multiple prior offenses, culminating in the incident at Green Street Market last Tuesday, where the defendant, he paused meaningfully, engaged in theft, disturbing the peace, and resisting arrest when confronted by the store owner. Mr. Riley's actions are not those of a misguided individual deserving of our sympathy, but those of a habitual offender. We will demonstrate conclusively that leniency would be inappropriate. Justice demands significant consequences. Marcus winced, each accusation landing like a physical blow. He knew he'd made mistakes, terrible ones. But the way Reeves portrayed him, like some irredeemable monster cut deep. He wasn't a monster, just broken in ways few could comprehend. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. His court-appointed attorney, Emily Chen, a woman no more than 30 with intelligent eyes and a determined set to her jaw, placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Mr. Riley, the jury needs to hear your perspective. Your experiences matter." He shook his head, shame burning like acid in his gut. "What's the point?" he mumbled, his voice barely audible after days of disuse. But Emily persisted, her quiet conviction gradually wearing down his resistance. Finally, he agreed to take the stand. He swore to tell the truth, the words bitter on his tongue. Under Emily's careful questioning, he recounted the events leading to his arrest, his voice flat, emotionless. He didn't mention the nightmares that terrorized him nightly, the flashbacks triggered by the slightest unexpected sound, or the crushing emptiness that had driven him to seek oblivion in cheap alcohol. He simply stated the facts, stripped of context or explanation. "Why did you resist when Mr. Henderson tried to detain you?" Reeves asked during cross-examination, skepticism dripping from every word. Marcus hesitated, studying his scarred hands. "I panicked. Because a citizen asked you to return stolen merchandise?" Reeves's voice dripped with disbelief. "It wasn't just asking," Marcus muttered, fragments of memory surfacing, the store owner's rough grip on his collar, the shouted accusations. "He grabbed me, started yelling." "So you admit to assaulting Mr. Henderson?" Reeves pounced. "No, I didn't. I just tried to get away." Marcus looked down, defeated. The courtroom seemed to waver before his eyes, reality becoming fluid and uncertain. He was drowning in his own failures. Judge Matthews observed the proceedings with outward neutrality, though something in the defendant's demeanor, the way he flinched at loud sounds, his perpetually downcast eyes, triggered a flicker of recognition. Still, her expression remained composed, her gaze steady and evaluative. "State your full name for the record," the clerk instructed, her voice amplified by the microphone. Marcus hunched further into himself, the scratchy fabric of the suit. Emily had provided for him, irritating his skin. He felt exposed, every eye in the room, a predator tracking his movements. The fluorescent lights continued their maddening drone, intensifying the throbbing behind his temples. He swallowed against the dryness in his throat, making speech a painful effort. He began, his voice emerging as a raw croak. He hadn't spoken much during his 3 days in custody. The holding cell had been a sanctuary of sorts, a grey, featureless space where memories couldn't fully materialize. Now, under the weight of so many judgmental stares, the memories clawed at him relentlessly. "Your full name, please," the clerk repeated, impatience edging into her tone. She was young, perhaps mid-20s, with bright red lipstick and hair pulled back in a severe bun. She regarded him with that familiar mixture of pity and disgust. To her, he was just another case file, another form to be processed and filed away. Marcus closed his eyes momentarily. Images flashed behind his eyelids, sand-swept deserts, the deafening percussion of mortar fire, the weight of a wounded comrade across his shoulders. Then came the hospital ceilings, the pitying looks from doctors, the stream of medications that dulled everything, including his will to live. Gone. All of it replaced by the cold, sterile reality of this courtroom and the inescapable weight of his failures. He opened his eyes, fixing his gaze on a point just above the clerk's head. Part of him longed to lie, to give a false name and slip back into anonymous obscurity, but some last remnant of the man he once was, the man who had stood for something, wouldn't allow it. He leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper, a fragile thing threatening to shatter in the vast space of the courtroom. "Marcus," he began, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. How long had it been since anyone had actually addressed him by name, rather than, "Hey you," or worse? He took a shaky breath and forced the words out, each syllable heavy with unspoken history. Marcus Riley. The ambient hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to intensify, filling the sudden vacuum of sound. The clerk's fingers froze above her. A keyboard. The murmured conversations that had been rippling through the courtroom abruptly ceased, every eye fixed on him with laser intensity. Even the shuffling of papers from Emily Chen beside him halted. The silence pressed down like a physical weight, smothering and absolute. At the bench, Judge Eleanor Matthews straightened in her chair. The fine lines etched around her eyes deepened as her gaze sharpened. She had been scanning the case file with the resigned efficiency of someone who had seen thousands like it before. Now she looked up, her eyes locking onto Marcus with sudden, laser-like focus. There was a flicker of something in her expression, recognition, disbelief, perhaps even fear. She cleared her throat, the sound reverberating in the stillness. "Could you repeat your name, Mr. Riley?" Her voice maintained its professional neutrality, but Marcus detected an undercurrent, a subtle tremor that betrayed her composed facade. The name echoed in the courtroom, bouncing off the mahogany paneling and the high ceiling. Riley, once a name associated with valor, with sacrifice, with brotherhood. Now tarnished, diminished, a shadow of its former significance. Marcus looked down at his hands, clasped so tightly in his lap that the knuckles had turned white. The monster was out now, the past unleashed. There would be no crawling back into the comforting darkness of anonymity. Judge Matthews' mind raced, struggling to reconcile the broken figure before her with the memories that name had suddenly unearthed. Could it truly be him? After all these years, the timing aligned, but this hollow-eyed man bore little resemblance to the soldier she remembered. "Mr. Riley," she said more firmly now, "have you served in the United States military?" A ripple, of murmurs spread through the gallery. Victor Reeves frowned, sensing a shift in the atmosphere that he couldn't quite identify. Marcus nodded almost imperceptibly, his eyes still downcast. "Yes, Your Honor. Marines, 2 tours in Afghanistan." Judge Matthews removed her glasses, setting them carefully on the bench before her. Her expression remained inscrutable, but those close enough could see that her hands trembled slightly. "In what capacity did you serve, Mr. Riley?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably, clearly reluctant to elaborate. "Scout sniper, ma'am. 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines." Another wave of whispers swept through the courtroom. Emily Chen glanced at her client with new eyes, suddenly seeing dimensions to him that hadn't been apparent before. Judge Matthews nodded slowly, as though confirming something to herself. "I believe we need to examine certain aspects of this. In case more thoroughly," she announced. "Court will recess for 30 minutes. She brought her gavel down with unusual force, the sharp crack silencing the growing murmurs. "Your Honor!" Reeves protested, rising to his feet. "The state has prepared its case based on the defendant's criminal actions, not his military history." "This is hardly relevant to—" "Mr. Reeves," Judge Matthews interrupted, her voice carrying a steel edge rarely heard in her courtroom. "You will find that I determine what is relevant in my courtroom. 30 minutes. Her tone left no room for further discussion. As bailiffs led Marcus back to the holding cell, Judge Matthews retreated to her chambers, closing the door firmly behind her. She moved to her desk with uncharacteristic urgency, unlocking the bottom drawer with a key. She kept on a chain around her neck. From it, she withdrew a worn leather photo album that hadn't seen daylight in years. Her fingers, suddenly clumsy with emotion, fumbled through the pages until she found what she sought. A group photograph taken at Forward Operating Base Rhino in Kandahar Province, 2002. Her eyes scanned the faces of the young Marines, focusing on one figure standing slightly apart from the others, his expression serious even in that moment of camaraderie. Marcus Riley, the battalion's legendary scout sniper, the man who had saved 37 lives, including her brother's, during the bloodiest ambush of their deployment. Eleanor Matthews, who had been Captain Eleanor Davis then, serving as a military attorney with the Judge Advocate General's Corps, remembered the day with crystal clarity, the day that had forever changed her understanding of courage, of sacrifice, of what one human being would risk for others. The sweltering heat of the Afghan desert sun beat down mercilessly on the convoy. Captain Eleanor Davis sat rigid in the lead Humvee, dust coating her throat despite the bandana covering her nose and mouth. As the JAG officer assigned to investigate allegations of civilian casualties, she had insisted on visiting the site, impersonally overriding the concerns of her commanding officer. 5 minutes to the village, ma'am, the driver informed her, eyes constantly scanning the rugged terrain. Her brother, Lieutenant Christopher Davis, commanded the security detail, accompanying her. He had argued vehemently against this excursion, calling it an unnecessary risk. But Eleanor was nothing if not determined, some called it stubborn, and had pulled rank to make it happen. The convoy rounded a bend in the crude dirt road, the village of Kala Gush appearing in the distance, a cluster of mud brick buildings, shimmering in the heat haze. That was when the world exploded. The deafening blast of the IED tore through the lead Humvee, flipping it onto its side in a shower of dirt and metal fragments. Eleanor's head slammed against the window, her ears ringing as blood trickled down her temple. Disoriented, she fumbled with her seatbelt as gunfire erupted from the ridgelines surrounding them. "Ambush! Taking fire from all sides!" someone shouted. Through her dazed state, Eleanor registered the driver's still form beside her, half his face covered in blood. She struggled to reach for him when the door beside her was wrenched open. "Captain, we need to move now." Her brother's face appeared, streaked with dirt and fear. Christopher dragged her from the wreckage as bullets kicked up dust around them. They scrambled behind the overturned vehicle, joining the rest of the security team as they established a defensive position. "Call for air support," Christopher ordered, returning fire at the barely visible figures on the ridge. "Negative on air support," came the radio operator's grim reply. "Nearest assets are engaged elsewhere. QRF is mobilizing, but ETA is 40 minutes plus." Christopher's face tightened. "We don't have 40 minutes. The insurgents were well positioned, with clear fields of fire. The convoy was pinned down, with limited ammunition and 3 wounded already. Eleanor, despite her minimal combat training, took a rifle from a wounded Marine and did what she could, forcing herself to remember her basic marksmanship lessons. "We need to move to better cover," Christopher yelled over the gunfire. "That drainage ditch to the south might work, but it's 70 meters of open ground." As they desperately strategized, a voice crackled over the radio. "Thunderbolt, this is Phantom. Hold position, I have eyes on hostiles." Christopher grabbed the radio. "Phantom? Who the hell is Phantom? We're taking heavy fire here." "Scout sniper team, sir. We were tracking movement in this sector. Count approximately 25 tangos on the ridgeline. I can provide coverage for your movement to the ditch, but you'll need to move on my mark." Eleanor watched her brother's expression shift from skepticism to desperate hope. "Copy that." Phantom standing by. What followed was something Eleanor would never forget. With preternatural precision, the unseen sniper began systematically eliminating the threats. Each crack of his rifle was followed by one less source of enemy fire. The rhythm was almost hypnotic. Shot, pause, methodical and eerily calm amidst the chaos. "Move now," the voice directed after several minutes. "I've cleared the primary firing positions. Go in groups of 3 5-second intervals." Christopher organized the evacuation, sending the wounded first. Eleanor helped where she could, half carrying a young Marine with a shrapnel wound in his leg. As they dashed across the open ground, she felt horribly exposed, certain that at any moment bullets would find them. But the snipers covering fire kept the remaining insurgents pinned down. They had almost reached safety when a hidden shooter rose from behind a rock formation, a position no one could have anticipated, and aimed directly at Christopher, who was helping the last wounded Marine. Eleanor screamed a warning, but it came too late. The insurgent's finger was already tightening on the trigger when his head snapped back in a spray of red mist. An impossible shot, over 800 meters, with significant crosswind, at a target exposed for less than 2 seconds. When the QRF finally arrived, they found the battered convoy safe in the drainage ditch. The mysterious sniper team materialized. From the landscape as if formed from the dust itself, 2 Marines in ghillie suits, their faces streaked with camouflage paint. The shooter, a staff sergeant named Marcus Riley, accepted Christopher's fervent thanks with quiet dignity. "Just doing my job, sir," was all he said. Later, in the relative safety of the base, Eleanor learned that Riley had eliminated 17 insurgents that day, including the one about to kill her brother. His spotter confirmed that several of the shots had been at the extreme edge of what was considered possible, even for an elite sniper. When she tried to thank him personally, Riley had seemed almost embarrassed by the attention. "Anyone would have done the same, Mom," he told her, his eyes revealing a depth and intelligence that belied his humble words. Now, 17 years later, that same man sat in her courtroom, charged with stealing food, his eyes vacant, his spirit seemingly crushed beyond recognition. Judge Matthews closed the album, her decision made. The law was important, it was her life's work, but there were times when justice required looking beyond the letter of the statute to the human being standing before the bench. She owed Marcus Riley that much. She owed him everything. As the bailiff called the court back to order, Judge Matthews returned to her seat with a renewed sense of purpose. The courtroom settled into expectant silence as Marcus was led back to the defendant's table. He looked, if possible, even more defeated than before, as though the brief respite had only served to drain what little energy he had left. "Before we continue," Judge Matthews began, her voice carrying an authority that commanded attention, "I'd like to address a matter of significant relevance to these proceedings." Victor Reeves shifted uneasily in his seat, sensing that his carefully constructed case was about to encounter an unexpected obstacle. "Mr. Riley," Judge Matthews continued, looking directly at Marcus, "would you please stand?" With visible effort, Marcus pushed himself to his feet, still avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. "Mr. Riley, is it correct that you served as a scout sniper with the 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines in Afghanistan?" "Yes, Your Honor," he mumbled, barely audible. "And were you deployed to Kandahar province in 2002? A flicker of surprise crossed his features. "Yes, ma'am." Judge Matthews nodded, then removed her glasses, a gesture that signaled to courtroom regulars that something unusual was about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen, members of the jury," she addressed the entire courtroom now, "I find myself in an extraordinary position. In the interest of full disclosure and judicial transparency, I must inform you that I have prior knowledge of the defendant that may be relevant to these proceedings." A murmur rippled through the gallery. This was decidedly off-script. "In 2002, I was Captain Eleanor Davis, serving with the Judge Advocate General's Corps in Afghanistan. On April 17th of that year, a convoy I was traveling with was ambushed near the village of Kalagush." She paused, the memory still vivid after all these years. "The convoy was pinned down under heavy fire, with multiple casualties and no immediate support available. Staff Sergeant Marcus Riley, acting as a scout sniper, provided covering fire that allowed the surviving members of the convoy to reach safety. His actions that day saved 37 lives, including my own and that of my brother." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Emily Chen stared at her client with new understanding, while Victor Reeves's expression darkened. "Given this personal connection, I believe it would be appropriate for me to recuse myself from this case." "No!" The voice that interrupted her was Marcus's, louder and more forceful than anyone had heard from him yet. "Please, Your Honor, I don't want special treatment. I just want this over with." Judge Matthews regarded him thoughtfully. "Mr. Riley, this isn't about special treatment. It's about ensuring that justice is administered fairly and without bias." "Then be fair," he said simply, his eyes finally meeting hers. "Judge me for what I did, not for who I was." The directness of his gaze, the first real connection he had made with anyone in the courtroom, struck Judge Matthews forcefully. In that moment, she glimpsed the man he had once been, the Marine who had faced impossible odds with unflinching courage. "Very well, Mr. Riley," she said after a moment's consideration. "I will continue to preside over this case, but with the following adjustments. The jury will be instructed to disregard any personal history between the defendant and myself, and both counsel will be granted additional latitude in questioning to ensure complete impartiality." She turned to the gallery, her expression grave. "However, there is another matter that cannot be ignored. Mr. Riley's military service and his actions in Afghanistan are directly relevant to this case, not as exculpatory evidence, but as potentially mitigating factors that must be considered in the interest of true justice." "Objection!" Victor Reeves sprang to his feet, his face flushed with indignation. "Your Honor, the defendant's military history, while commendable, has no bearing on his subsequent criminal actions. The state is prepared to stipulate to the defendant's honorable service, but it cannot be used to excuse lawbreaking." Judge Matthews fixed him with a steady gaze. "Your objection is noted, Mr. Reeves, but overruled. This court will consider all relevant factors in determining appropriate justice, including the defendant's service to his country and any subsequent circumstances that may have contributed to his current situation. She turned to Emily Chen. Counsel, are you prepared to present evidence regarding Mr. Riley's post-service experiences, including any medical or psychological issues resulting from his military service? Emily, recovering from her surprise, nodded firmly. Yes, Your Honor. The defense would like to call Dr. Rebecca Winters, a specialist in post-traumatic stress disorder among combat veterans. As the afternoon progressed, the true dimensions of Marcus Riley's story emerged. Dr. Winters testified about the severe PTSD he suffered following his combat experiences, compounded by traumatic brain injury from an IED explosion during his second tour. Medical records revealed multiple suicide attempts, extended stays in VA hospitals, and a cocktail of medications with severe side effects. Former commanding officers appeared as character witnesses, describing the exemplary Marine that Marcus had been. Social workers testified about the systemic failures that had allowed a decorated veteran to fall through the cracks into homelessness and desperation. Throughout it all, Marcus sat silently, his expression a mixture of shame and disbelief as his private struggles were laid bare before strangers. When Victor Reeves rose for closing arguments, his earlier righteousness had been tempered by what he had heard. Still, he remained committed to his duty. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his tone measured. No one in this courtroom disputes Mr. Riley's service or the debt our nation owes him. But the law must apply equally to all citizens, regardless of their past heroism. The fact remains that Mr. Riley committed theft and resisted legitimate attempts to detain him. These actions have consequences, as they must in a society governed by laws rather than emotions. He paused, his expression softening slightly. The state acknowledges the mitigating circumstances presented by the defense and would not oppose a lenient sentence. But we cannot simply ignore wrongdoing because we sympathize with the wrongdoer. That is not justice. It is sentiment disguised as judgment. Emily Chen's closing argument was passionate and direct. Mr. Reeves speaks of equal application of the law, but there is nothing equal about what Marcus Riley has experienced. He gave everything for his country, his health, his peace of mind, his future prospects. And when he returned broken and in need, that same country failed him at every turn. She moved closer to the jury box, her voice dropping to an intimate tone. Marcus Riley didn't choose to steal because he lacks moral character. He stole because he was hungry and desperate, abandoned by the very systems that should have supported him. The true injustice here is not what Mr. Riley did to survive, but what was done to him after he served so honorably. As the jury filed out to deliberate, an unexpected commotion arose in the gallery. A gray-haired man in his 60s, dressed in a crisp suit with a Marine Corps pin on his lapel, approached the bar, separating the spectators from the court proceedings. "Your Honor," he called out, his voice carrying the unmistakable tone of someone accustomed to command, "may I address the court?" Judge Matthews peered at him with surprise. "Sir, this is highly irregular. The court is in session and I'm Colonel James Harrison, retired, Your Honor. I served with Staff Sergeant Riley in Afghanistan. I've only just learned of these proceedings, and I believe I have information directly relevant to this case." Judge Matthews hesitated, torn between procedural propriety and her instinct that this interruption was significant. "The jury has already been dismissed for deliberations, Colonel. Then I'll speak to you, Your Honor, in chambers if necessary, but I will be heard." The Colonel's tone made it clear that he was not accustomed to being denied. After a moment's consideration, Judge Matthews nodded. Very well. Court will recess briefly. Mr. Riley, Colonel Harrison, and counsel for both sides will join me in chambers. In the privacy of her office, Colonel Harrison wasted no time. Judge Matthews, I understand you were present during the Karlagush ambush, but there are aspects of Staff Sergeant Riley's service that were classified at the time, which I've received permission to disclose given these circumstances. He turned to Marcus, who stared at him with a mixture of recognition and apprehension. Riley was not just any scout sniper. He was part of a specialized unit conducting high-risk operations throughout Kandahar province. The official record shows 17 confirmed eliminations during the ambush. What it doesn't show is that Riley remained in position for 14 hours after the convoy was evacuated, preventing a much larger force from advancing on the FOB. The colonel's voice softened. He was awarded the Navy Cross for his actions that day, though the full citation remains classified. And on his second tour, he saved an entire village from being massacred, sustaining the traumatic brain injury that ultimately ended his military career. Judge Matthews looked at Marcus with new understanding. Why isn't any of this in the records we've seen? Because much of Riley's work was conducted under operational security restrictions, the colonel explained, and because Riley himself requested that certain commendations be omitted from his public record, he never wanted recognition. Marcus spoke for the first time since entering the chambers. It was just my job, Mum. Nothing special about doing your job. Colonel Harrison fixed him with a stern look. That's always been your problem, Riley. You never understood your own exceptional nature. He turned back to the judge. I've spent the last 5 years working with a non-profit that helps combat veterans transition to civilian life. When I heard about this case, I immediately arranged for housing, medical care, and employment opportunities for Riley, should the court see fit to release him into our program rather than incarceration. Judge Matthews considered this information carefully. Colonel, I appreciate your intervention, but the jury is already deliberating. The decision is out of my hands until they return a verdict. Not entirely, Emily Chen interjected, if the prosecution would consider amending the charges. All eyes turned to Victor Reeves, who had been uncharacteristically silent throughout the exchange. The prosecutor adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable with the pressure of the moment. The state's priority is justice, not punishment for its own sake, he said finally. In light of this new information, I would be willing to reduce the charges to a misdemeanor and recommend release on probation, contingent on Mr. Riley's participation in the colonel's program. Before Judge Matthews could respond, a knock at the door announced the bailiff, Your Honor, the jury has reached a verdict. They filed back into the courtroom, the tension palpable as the foreman stood to deliver their decision. But before he could speak, Judge Matthews raised her hand. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I must inform you that in your absence, new evidence has come to light, and the prosecution has amended the charges against Mr. Riley. As such, your verdict is no longer required. I thank you for your service, and dismiss you with the court's gratitude. After the confused jurors had been escorted out, Judge Matthews addressed the remaining parties. Mr. Riley, please stand. Marcus rose slowly, his expression guarded, as though afraid to hope. Marcus, Riley, this court finds you guilty of misdemeanor theft. You are sentenced to 2 years probation, conditional upon your participation in the Veterans Rehabilitation Program presented by Colonel Harrison. Her voice softened slightly. This court also extends its profound gratitude for your service to our nation and its sincere apologies for the failures of our systems to provide you with the support you earned and deserved. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Marcus Riley's shoulders straightened, a ghost of his military, bearing returning, "Thank you, Your Honor." As the formal proceedings concluded, an extraordinary thing happened. Colonel Harrison stood at attention and saluted Marcus. One by one, other veterans in the gallery rose and did the same. Then, court officers, the boardroom, a bailiff, even Victor Reeves, all standing in silent respect. Judge Matthews, moved beyond protocol, descended from the bench and approached Marcus. "Staff Sergeant Riley," she said, reverting to his military rank, "on behalf of my brother and the 36 others who came home because of you, thank you." And then, in an unprecedented breach of courtroom decorum, Judge Eleanor Matthews, who had never in 20 years deviated from strict judicial propriety, raised her hand in a solemn salute to the man who had saved her life. The entire courtroom rose as one. The morning light filtered through the dusty blinds of Colonel Harrison's office, casting long shadows across the worn carpet. Marcus Riley sat stiffly in a faded armchair, his newly issued clothes still carrying the department store creases. 2 weeks had passed since that extraordinary day in court, yet he still moved through the world as if expecting it to dissolve around him, a dream from which he would inevitably awaken. "You look better," Colonel Harrison remarked, settling, his substantial frame behind the cluttered desk. "Still too thin, but better." Marcus nodded silently, his gaze fixed on the military commendations that lined the wall, echoes of another life. The halfway house where he now resided provided regular meals and a clean bed, luxuries he had almost forgotten. Yet sleep remained, elusive, his nights haunted by the familiar demons that had driven him to the streets in the first place. "Dr. Winters says you've been attending your therapy sessions," Harrison continued, studying Marcus with the appraising eye of a commanding officer. "But she also says you barely speak." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "Not much to say." "Bullshit." The colonel's blunt response carried no malice, only the straightforward candor of someone who had seen too much to tolerate evasion. "You've got 17 years of much to say bottled up inside you. It's eating you alive, Riley. With respect, sir, I'm following the program requirements. I'm showing up." A flash of the old Marine discipline surfaced briefly in his tone. Harrison leaned forward, his weathered face softening slightly. "Showing up isn't enough, and you know it. This isn't about checking boxes. It's about reclaiming your life. Maybe my life isn't worth reclaiming." The words escaped before Marcus could contain them, hanging in the air between the two men like an unexploded ordnance. The colonel's eyes narrowed, not with anger but with recognition. How many veterans had sat in that same chair, expressing that same sentiment? Too many to count. "That's not your call to make, Staff Sergeant," he said quietly. "Not when there are people still alive today because of you, people with children who wouldn't exist if you hadn't done what you did. Your life is connected to theirs in ways you can't dismiss." Marcus flinched at the use of his former rank. He no longer felt worthy of it, hadn't for years. "I've got something for you," Harrison said, changing tactics. He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across the surface. "Judge Matthews sent this over, thought you might want to see it." Hesitantly, Marcus opened the folder. Inside was a photograph, a group shot taken at Forward Operating Base Rhino. His younger self stared back at him, standing slightly apart from the others, expression serious beneath the Afghan sun. He barely recognized the confident Marine he had been, his eyes clear and determined, body strong and capable. "Turn it over," Harrison instructed. Marcus flipped the photo. On the back, in neat handwriting, "To remind you of who you still are. E.M." A knot formed in his throat. He closed the folder quickly, as though the image burned his fingers. "I have a proposition for you," Harrison said, allowing Marcus a moment to compose himself. "Part of this program involves community service. I've arranged something I think might suit your particular skills." Marcus looked up warily. "Sir?" The local high school has a JROTC program. Their marksmanship team needs a coach. Their last one retired, and they've been struggling to find a replacement with the right experience. You want me to teach kids to shoot? Marcus couldn't hide his disbelief. I haven't touched a rifle in years, and after everything... It's air rifles, Riley. Olympic-style target shooting, precision, focus, discipline. All things you understand better than most. Harrison's expression grew earnest. These kids need someone who can teach them more than just how to hit a target. They need someone who understands that true strength comes from control, not power. Marcus shook his head. I'm not a teacher. I'm barely holding myself together. Sometimes the best teaching happens when we're still learning ourselves. Harrison stood, signaling the end of the discussion. Monday, 3:30 p.m. I've already told them you're coming. Don't make a liar out of me, Staff Sergeant. As Marcus left the office, the weight of the colonel's expectations settled heavily on his shoulders. He had spent years disappearing, becoming invisible to a world that had no place for what he had become. Now he was being asked not only to be seen, but to stand before others as an example, a mentor. The very thought made his skin crawl with anxiety. Outside, the city streets bustled with midday activity. People hurried past, absorbed in their own concerns, oblivious to the war still raging inside the quiet man in their midst. Marcus walked without purpose, trying to process the conversation. His wandering eventually led him to Jefferson Park, where he found a secluded bench beneath an ancient oak tree. The familiar urge for alcohol gnawed at him, the desire to numb the chaos in his mind, to silence the screaming thoughts. He had been sober since his arrest, but sobriety meant feeling everything he had spent years trying to escape. Thought I might find you here? The voice startled him from his dark contemplation. Emily Chen, his court-appointed attorney, stood. On the path before him, a cardboard tray with 2 coffee cups in her hands. Unlike their courtroom encounters, she was dressed casually in jeans and a light sweater, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Miss Chen. He straightened slightly, military habit reasserting itself. How did you... Colonel Harrison called. He thought you might need a friendly face after your meeting. She offered one of the coffee cups. Mind if I join you? Marcus accepted the cup with awkward gratitude, shifting to make room on the bench. The warm aroma of the coffee provided a momentary anchor, something real and immediate to focus on. He wants me to coach high school kids, Marcus said after a long silence. Marksmanship team. Emily nodded, sipping her coffee. And that bothers you? It wasn't a question, but Marcus answered anyway. Seems wrong, using those skills again, after everything they led to. Those skills saved lives, Marcus. They saved Judge Matthews and 36 others that day in Afghanistan. They also took lives. The words were barely audible. 17 confirmed during that ambush alone. More than I can count across 2 tours. Emily considered this, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. My grandfather fought in Vietnam. He never talked about it, not until he was dying. Then he couldn't stop talking about it, the regrets, the nightmares, the friends he lost. She turned to face him directly. You know what his biggest regret was? Not the lives he took in combat. He'd made peace with that. It was all the years he wasted afterwards, punishing himself for surviving when others didn't. Marcus stared into his coffee, unable to meet her gaze. It's not that simple. No, it's not, Emily agreed. But those kids don't need you to be perfect, Marcus. They don't need you to have all the answers. They just need someone who understands the weight of the skill they're learning, someone who can teach them that precision and power must always be balanced with wisdom and restraint. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching squirrels chase each other through the grass. The park hummed with life. Children playing, couples walking hand in hand, elderly men engaged in serious chess battles. Normal life, the kind that had seemed inaccessible to Marcus for so long. "I don't know if I can do it," he finally admitted. "That's okay," Emily replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Do it afraid. Do it uncertain. Just do it." The following Monday found Marcus standing awkwardly outside the high school gymnasium, fighting the urge to turn and walk away. The building's institutional architecture triggered uncomfortable parallels with military barracks and VA hospitals, places of confinement rather than growth. "Mr. Riley," a woman in her 40s approached, extending her hand. "I'm Principal Watkins. Colonel Harrison told us to expect you. The team is already inside." He followed her through echoing corridors, past rows of lockers and classroom doors, adorned with student artwork and motivational posters. The normalcy of it all felt surreal after years of survival on society's margins. The gymnasium had been partially converted into a shooting range, with 5 lanes set up at one end. Targets hung at the regulation distance, and air rifles rested on shooting tables. 8 students in JROTC uniforms stood in a loose cluster, their conversation dying as Marcus entered. "Attention!" Principal Watkins called, and the students immediately snapped to order, their posture straightening with varying degrees of proficiency. "This is Staff Sergeant Marcus Riley, United States Marine Corps, retired. He'll be taking over as your marksmanship coach." Marcus winced internally at the introduction. He hadn't retired. He had been medically discharged after his second tour, his body and mind too damaged to continue service. But he nodded acknowledgement to the students, scanning their young faces with the automatic situational awareness that had never left him. They were a diverse group, 4 boys and 4 girls, ranging from freshmen to seniors based on their apparent ages. Their expressions revealed a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and, in one case, open hostility. "I'll leave you to get acquainted," Principal Watkins said cheerfully, oblivious to the tension. "The faculty supervisor, Mr. Delaney, will be here shortly to help with anything you need." As the principal's footsteps faded, an uncomfortable silence descended. Marcus cleared his throat. "At ease," he said, the command feeling foreign on his tongue after so many years. The students relaxed marginally, exchanging glances. "So you're our new coach," said a tall boy with close-cropped hair, clearly the self-appointed leader of the group. "What makes you qualified?" "Michael!" A girl with a neat braid elbowed him sharply. "Don't be rude." Marcus held up a hand. "It's a fair question." He met the boy's challenging gaze. "I served as a scout sniper with the 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines, 2 tours in Afghanistan." "How many confirmed kills?" Michael asked, a gleam of morbid fascination in his eyes. The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. This was exactly why he shouldn't be here, why he had no business working with impressionable young minds. Before he could formulate a response, another voice cut in. "That's not what this is about, and you know it." The speaker was a slight girl, standing at the back of the group, her expression serious beneath a short crop of dark hair. "Marksmanship isn't about killing. It's about precision, discipline, and control." Marcus studied her with new interest. "Your name?" "Cadet Lily Nguyen, sir," she replied crisply. "Team captain." "Cadet Nguyen is correct," Marcus said, finding his voice. "Competition shooting has nothing to do with combat marksmanship, except for the fundamental principles of breathing, focus, and consistency." He moved toward the firing line, needing movement to settle his jangling nerves. "Show me what you've got. One at a time. Fire a 10-shot group at your targets." For the next hour, Marcus observed each student, noting their strengths and weaknesses. Michael had natural talent, but was overconfident, rushing his shots. 2 freshmen struggled with basic stance and grip. Lily, the captain, showed remarkable Precision, but tensed visibly before each shot, affecting her consistency. As they finished, Marcus gathered them together. "You all have potential," he said honestly, "but you're making the same fundamental mistake." "Which is?" Michael challenged. "You're trying to hit the bullseye," Marcus replied. "That's not the goal." Confused looks passed between the students. "The goal is to execute the perfect shot process every single time. The bullseye is just a consequence of that perfection." He picked up one of the air rifles, checking it with practiced hands despite the years of disuse. "May I?" Lily nodded permission, and Marcus settled into position at the firing line. His body remembered what his mind had tried to forget: the controlled breathing, the alignment of sights, the gentle pressure of trigger against finger. He fired 5 shots in slow succession, each one striking within the 10 ring of the target, forming a tight group. "See?" he said, setting the rifle down carefully. "I wasn't aiming at the bullseye. I was focusing on making 5 perfect movements. The bullseye happened because the process was correct." He saw something shift in their expressions, a new attentiveness, perhaps even respect. "We'll start with the basics next session," he concluded. "Breathing, stance, grip, sight alignment, trigger control. Master those and the rest follows." As the students packed up their equipment, Lily approached him hesitantly. "Sir, may I ask you something?" Marcus nodded, bracing himself for another question about his combat experience. "How do you deal with competition pressure?" she asked. "Instead, I practice perfectly, but during matches I freeze up." The unexpected question caught him off guard. How long had it been since anyone had genuinely sought his advice? "Pressure isn't your enemy," he found himself saying. "It's just energy, same energy that makes you care about the outcome. The trick is channeling it productively instead of fighting it." Lily considered this, her expression thoughtful. "Like using the recoil to cycle the action instead of trying to prevent it." A small smile tugged at the corner of Marcus's mouth, the first genuine smile in longer than he could remember. "Exactly like that, cadet." As he left the school that afternoon, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose. It was fragile, barely perceptible beneath the ever-present weight of his trauma, but undeniably real. The following weeks established a routine: 3 afternoons a week with the marksmanship team, therapy sessions with Dr. Winters, and regular check-ins with Colonel Harrison. The structure provided an anchor, something to organize his days around after years of aimless survival. The students improved steadily under his guidance. Even Michael, initially resistant, began to show real progress once he understood that Marcus wasn't impressed by bravado. Lily, in particular, blossomed as a shooter, her natural talent enhanced by Marcus's technical instruction. 1 month into his coaching position, Marcus arrived at the range to find Colonel Harrison observing from the bleachers, his expression unreadable. "Sir," Marcus acknowledged, the old military formality instinctive. "Came to see how you're doing," Harrison replied. "These kids are looking sharp." Marcus nodded. "They work hard." "And their coach?" "I'm here," Marcus said simply. It was the most he could honestly claim. He showed up. He did the job. The nightmares still plagued him. The guilt still gnawed at his insides. But for a few hours each week, he existed beyond the confines of his trauma. Harrison seemed to understand the significance of that modest statement. "Judge Matthews has been asking about you. She'd like to stop by sometime, see what you're doing here." Marcus tensed. Since that day in court, he had deliberately avoided thinking about Eleanor Matthews and the debt he now owed her. Her intervention had saved him from jail, possibly even saved his life, but the weight of that obligation pressed uncomfortably on him. "If she wants," he said non-committally. Harrison studied him with shrewd eyes. "You know, most people would be grateful to have a federal judge in their corner." I am grateful, Marcus insisted, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Are you? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're still punishing yourself for surviving when others didn't. The observation struck too close to home, echoing Emily Chen's words in the park. Marcus turned away, busying himself with the equipment to avoid responding. There's a regional competition next month, he said, changing the subject. The team has potential, but they need more practice time. Harrison accepted the deflection, with a knowing look. I'll talk to Principal Watkins about extending your hours. After the colonel left, Marcus ran the students through their drills with even more intensity than usual, pushing them to refine each element of the shot process. As they packed up, Lily lingered behind. Is everything okay, Coach Riley? She asked, concern evident in her expression. Marcus was startled by the question and by the title she had used. When had he become coach rather than staff sergeant or sir? Fine, he replied automatically. Why? You seemed different today, more intense. She hesitated, then added, My dad was in the army. He gets that same look sometimes, like he's fighting something we can't see. The observation, delivered with such simple clarity, momentarily stripped away Marcus's defenses. This perceptive teenager had identified in minutes what he had spent years denying, that he was still fighting a war long after leaving the battlefield. Your father, he said carefully. Does he talk about it? His service? Lily shook her head. Not really. Sometimes I hear him at night when the nightmares come. Mom says he's getting better, but it's taking time. It does take time, Marcus acknowledged, the admission surprising him, more than you'd think. But he is getting better, Lily insisted, with the absolute conviction of youth. He's coaching my brother's baseball team now. Last year, he wouldn't even go to the games because the crowds made him nervous. The parallel to Marcus's own situation wasn't lost on him. Small steps, he murmured. That's what my dad says. Progress, not perfection. She shouldered her backpack. See you Thursday, Coach. As Marcus watched her leave, he felt something shift within him, a microscopic adjustment in his perspective. If Lily's father could find his way back from the darkness, one small step at a time, perhaps there was hope for Marcus as well. That evening, seated across from Dr. Winters in her comfortable office, Marcus found himself speaking more than he had in any previous session. The kids are improving, he said, describing the team's progress with unexpected animation. Lily, the captain, she's got real talent, natural instinct for it. Dr. Winters observed the change in his demeanor with professional interest. You seem to be connecting with them, especially this Lily. Marcus considered this. She reminds me of someone, one of my squad members from my first tour. Same intensity, same focus. Tell me about this squad member, Dr. Winters prompted gently. For a moment, Marcus retreated behind his walls, the familiar resistance rising. But something about the genuine progress of his marksmanship team had created a hairline crack in his armor. His name was Rodriguez, Carlos Rodriguez, best spotter I ever worked with, could read wind conditions like they were written in the air. The memory surfaced with unexpected clarity. Rodriguez sprawled beside him on a rocky outcrop, calling adjustments with absolute confidence. The easy rhythm they had developed, the unspoken trust. What happened to him? Dr. Winters asked, noting the past tense. Marcus stared at his hands. IED, second tour. We were moving positions, standard protocol. I went first, he followed 30 seconds later. Different path, same destination. His voice grew distant. I heard it, felt it, couldn't get to him in time. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken grief. Dr. Winters waited, allowing Marcus the space to process what he had revealed. I should have been the one to step on it, he finally said, the core of his guilt exposed at last. I was point. It should have been me. But then he would be the one sitting here, carrying the guilt of your death, Dr. Winters observed. Would you want that for him? The question pierced Marcus with unexpected force. Would he have wanted Rodriguez to spend years punishing himself for surviving, to waste his talents, his potential, drowning in guilt and cheap alcohol? No, he admitted softly. I'd want him to live, really live, not just exist. As he would want for you, Dr. Winters suggested, as all those who didn't make it home would want for those who did. The session ended without resolution. Such profound wounds couldn't be healed in a single conversation, but as Marcus left the office, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the faintest glimmer of possibility. Not hope exactly, but the distant suggestion that hope might someday be attainable. The following week brought an unexpected complication. As Marcus arrived at the school, Principal Watkins intercepted him in the parking lot, her expression concerned. Mr. Riley, I need to speak with you before practice. She led him to her office, where a middle-aged couple waited, their body language radiating tension. These are Michael's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Prescott. Marcus immediately recognized the defensive hostility in Mr. Prescott's stance, the same posture Michael adopted when challenged. What's this about? Marcus asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. It's about your qualifications, Mr. Prescott said bluntly. We've heard about your background, combat experience, PTSD, homelessness. Is this really the kind of influence our children should have? The accusation stung, all the more because it echoed Marcus's own doubts. Before he could respond, Principal Watkins intervened. Mr. Riley came highly recommended by Colonel Harrison, whom I trust implicitly. He's been an excellent coach, and the students are thriving under his guidance. Our son comes home talking about sniper techniques, Mrs. Prescott said, her voice tight with worry. This isn't the military. These are children. With respect, ma'am, Marcus said quietly, finding his voice. I teach Olympic-style precision marksmanship, the fundamentals of competitive shooting, nothing more. And your condition, Mr. Prescott pressed. How do we know you're stable enough to be around our kids? The question landed like a physical blow. Marcus had asked himself the same thing countless times. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to meet the man's gaze. I can't give you guarantees, he said honestly. I have PTSD, I'm in treatment, I take medication, I see a therapist twice a week, I'm working on it every day. His candor seemed to catch the Prescotts off guard. They had clearly expected denial or defensiveness. What I can tell you, Marcus continued, finding strength in the truth, is that your son has improved his average score by 12 points in 4 weeks. He's learning discipline, focus, and the value of consistent practice. And if my experiences, good and bad, can teach him something about resilience and recovery, then maybe that's not the worst influence he could have. Principal Watkins watched this exchange with growing respect. Mr. and Mrs. Prescott, I understand your concerns, but I stand by my decision to hire Mr. Riley. His technical expertise is unquestionable, and his character speaks for itself. If you'd like to observe a practice, you're welcome to do so. The Prescotts exchanged glances, their certainty visibly wavering. Perhaps we will, Mr. Prescott said finally. After they left, Principal Watkins turned to Marcus with a sympathetic expression. I apologize for that. Some parents are protective. They have a right to be concerned, Marcus said, surprised to find he meant it. But I won't apologize for who I am or what I've been through, not anymore. The words emerged unbidden, yet as soon as he spoke them, Marcus recognized their truth. For years, he had carried his past as a burden of shame. Perhaps it was time. to see it differently, not as a weight to bear, but as hard-won wisdom to share. That afternoon's practice took on new significance. As he guided the students through their drills, Marcus found himself speaking more openly than before, sharing not just technical instruction, but the philosophy behind it. Precision isn't about perfection, he told them as they adjusted their positions. It's about consistency, doing the same thing the right way over and over, even when conditions change, even when you're tired or stressed or doubting yourself. He moved among them, making small corrections. Control what you can control. Your breathing, your focus, your trigger squeeze. Accept what you can't. The wind, the lighting, the pressure. That's not just marksmanship. That's life. From the bleachers, he noticed the Prescotts watching, their expressions guarded but attentive. Beside them sat an unexpected observer, Judge Eleanor Matthews, in casual clothes rather than her judicial robes, her presence both a comfort and a challenge. As practice ended, Marcus braced himself for the inevitable confrontations. But Michael Prescott approached first, unaware of his parents' concerns. "Coach Riley," he said, an unusual earnestness replacing his typical bravado. "I think I finally get what you've been saying about the process. It's not about trying harder, it's about trusting the technique, right?" Marcus nodded, surprised and moved by the breakthrough. "Exactly. When you trust the process, you free yourself from the pressure of the outcome." Michael grinned, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him. "Makes sense. Thanks, Coach." As the students dispersed, Judge Matthews approached, extending her hand. "Impressive work, Staff Sergeant. These kids clearly respect you." Marcus accepted the handshake awkwardly. "Judge Matthews, I didn't expect to see you here." "Eleanor, please, we're not in court anymore." Her smile was warm, without a trace of the pity he had dreaded. "Colonel Harrison speaks highly of your coaching. I wanted to see for myself." Before Marcus could respond, the Prescotts joined them, their earlier hostility notably diminished. "Mr. Riley," Mr. Prescott began, his tone measured, "I owe you an apology. Watching you work with these students today, it's clear you have more to offer them than just technical instruction. Our son has changed since you started coaching," Mrs. Prescott added. "He's more focused, more disciplined, less impulsive." Marcus hadn't expected this concession. "Michael has potential," he said simply. "He just needed to channel his energy productively." As the Prescotts departed with renewed confidence in their son's coach, Eleanor turned to Marcus with an approving nod. "You're making a difference here," she observed, "not just for these kids, but for yourself." Marcus couldn't deny it. Something was shifting within him, a gradual awakening, a cautious emergence from the darkness he had inhabited for so long. "One small step at a time," he said, echoing Lily's father's wisdom. "Progress, not perfection." Eleanor's expression softened with understanding. "Sometimes the first step is the hardest, just showing up, being seen. You've already taken that step, Marcus. The rest will follow." As they walked together toward the parking lot, Marcus felt the afternoon sunlight on his face, really felt it perhaps for the first time in years. The warmth penetrated the numbness that had been his constant companion, reaching places long frozen by grief and guilt. The path ahead remained daunting, filled with obstacles both external and internal. But for the first time since returning from Afghanistan, Marcus Riley could envision a future worth walking toward, not just existing but living, contributing, perhaps even someday thriving. It was a fragile hope, but real. And for now, that was enough. The acrid smell of gun, oil, and the familiar weight of the cleaning rod in his hands transported Marcus to another time, another place. Yet unlike the flashbacks that had tormented him for years, this memory came without the accompanying terror. He sat at the workbench in the school's equipment room, methodically maintaining the team's air rifles, finding unexpected solace in the routine. 2 months had passed since he'd begun coaching the marksmanship team. 2 months of gradual, sometimes painful reintegration into a world he had long abandoned. The regional competition loomed just 1 week away, and Marcus found himself invested in his students' success in a way that surprised him. "Coach Riley?" Lily's voice pulled him from his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, holding a stack of paper targets. "We just finished practice rounds. Everyone's scores are improving." Marcus nodded, setting aside the rifle he'd been cleaning. "How about yours?" A hint of pride colored her response. 92 average, 3 points higher than last week. Gee, good. Consistency is building." He gestured for her to join him at the workbench. "Something on your mind?" Lily hesitated, arranging the targets in a neat pile before speaking. "Some of us were talking, after you left yesterday, about your story, about what happened in court." Marcus stiffened. The local newspaper had run a feature on the courtroom salute, as they called it, complete with interviews from Colonel Harrison and even Judge Matthews. Though his students had never directly mentioned it, he had sensed their growing curiosity. "What about it?" he asked cautiously. "We wanted to thank you," Lily said simply, "for not quitting on us, for showing up, even when it's hard." The sincerity in her voice caught Marcus off guard. These teenagers, with their limited life experience, somehow understood something fundamental about his struggle that many adults missed entirely. "I'm just doing my job," he replied, echoing the words he had used so often in Afghanistan. Lily shook her head, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "That's what my dad always says too. But we both know it's more than that." Before Marcus could respond, Michael appeared in the doorway, his usual cockiness tempered by a new sense of purpose. "Coach, we need your help with something," he announced. "Team meeting in 5 minutes." Puzzled, Marcus followed his 2 top shooters to the gymnasium, where the rest of the team waited. 8 students stood in a semicircle, an unusual solemnity in their young faces. "What's going on?" Marcus asked, scanning the group for clues. A freshman named David stepped forward, clearly designated as the spokesperson. "Coach Riley, we've been researching the regional competition. The winning team gets to advance to state finals, but we can't afford the travel expenses," Lily finished when David faltered. "The school budget only covers the regional event. If we qualify for state, we'd need additional funding." Marcus frowned. He had been so focused on preparing the team technically that he hadn't considered the logistical challenges beyond the immediate competition. "Have you spoken with Principal Watkins?" "She says there's no more money in the activities budget," Michael explained. "We'd need to raise the funds ourselves." "And we have an idea," Lily continued, a spark of determination in her eyes. "A community fundraiser, but we need your help to make it happen." "My help?" Marcus was bewildered. "I don't know anything about fundraising." "Not with the fundraising itself," David clarified, "with the demonstration." The students exchanged glances, and Marcus sensed they had rehearsed this pitch carefully. "We want to put on a marksmanship exhibition," Lily explained. "Show the community what we've learned, why it matters. We thought maybe you could talk about how these skills translate to life. Discipline, focus, resilience, the things you've been teaching us." Marcus felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. They were asking him to speak publicly, to put himself on display, to revisit aspects of his military service he had spent years trying to forget. "I don't think," he began. "Please, Coach," Michael interrupted, uncharacteristic vulnerability in his expression. "We've worked too hard to miss this opportunity, and people would come if they knew you were involved. A real Marine hero." Marcus winced at the description. "I'm not a hero, Michael." You saved 37 people in Afghanistan, David countered. Judge Matthews told my dad all about it. That sounds like a hero to me. And you saved us too, Lily added quietly. Before you came, this team was falling apart. We were just going through the motions. Now we have a purpose, a direction. Marcus looked at their earnest faces, recognizing the impact he had made in their lives, an impact he had been too focused on his own healing to fully acknowledge. These young people saw something in him that he had long since stopped seeing. In himself, value, purpose, worth. When would this exhibition be? He asked finally. Saturday at the community center, Lily replied, barely containing her excitement. We've already spoken with Colonel Harrison. He's helping us coordinate. Of course he was, Marcus thought wryly. The Colonel's influence seemed to extend everywhere these days. I'll think about it, he conceded, unwilling to commit but equally unwilling to disappoint them outright. The students exchanged triumphant glances, clearly interpreting his non-refusal as agreement. As they dispersed, chattering excitedly about their plans, Marcus remained rooted in place, a familiar anxiety building in his chest. Public speaking, putting himself on display, talking about Afghanistan, about his experiences, about the lessons he'd learned through blood and loss. The very thought made his heart race and his palms sweat. He was still standing there, lost in thought, when Eleanor Matthews entered the gymnasium. She had taken to stopping by practices occasionally, her interest in the team's progress genuine and encouraging. You look like you've seen a ghost, Staff Sergeant, she observed, approaching with an easy confidence that Marcus still envied. The kids want to do a fundraiser, he explained, a public demonstration. They want me to, talk. Understanding dawned in Eleanor's eyes. Ah, and that prospect terrifies you more than enemy fire ever did. The accuracy of her assessment drew a reluctant half-smile from Marcus. Something like that. Eleanor gestured toward the bleachers. Walk with me. They settled on the lowest tier, the empty gymnasium echoing with their footsteps. Eleanor was silent for a moment, collecting her thoughts. When I first returned from Afghanistan, she began, I couldn't speak about it. Not to my family, not to my colleagues, certainly not to strangers. I buried myself in legal briefs and procedural minutiae, anything to avoid processing what I'd experienced. Marcus listened intently. In all their interactions, Eleanor had never shared her own post-deployment struggles. What changed? He asked. Time, partly, she admitted, but mostly necessity. I was assigned a case involving a veteran who'd gotten into legal trouble, not unlike your situation, actually. During the proceedings, I realized that my silence wasn't protecting me. It was isolating me, and worse, it was preventing me from using my experiences to help others who were suffering. She turned to face him directly. Those kids admire you, Marcus, not just for your technical skills, but for who you are, your resilience, your perseverance. The story they want you to share isn't about war. It's about survival, about coming back from the darkest places and finding purpose again. Marcus stared at the polished gymnasium floor, absorbing her words. I'm still finding my way, he said finally, still putting the pieces back together. I'm not sure I have any wisdom worth sharing. That's exactly why your voice matters, Eleanor countered, because you're in the middle of the journey, not at the end, because you're proof that moving forward is possible, even when it feels impossible. Her words resonated with something Marcus had been feeling lately, a growing awareness that his struggles, rather than making him uniquely broken, connected him to countless others walking similar paths. I'll think about it, he repeated, more genuinely this time. Eleanor nodded, satisfied. That's all anyone can ask. The next morning, Marcus met with Dr. Winters for their regular therapy session. The office had become a familiar space, No longer triggering the institutional anxiety he had initially experienced. "I hear there's a fundraiser in the works," Dr. Winters remarked, settling into her chair. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast." "Small town," she replied with a smile. "And Colonel Harrison is quite the enthusiastic advocate. How do you feel about public speaking?" "Terrified," Marcus admitted, the honesty coming more easily these days. "But also considering it." Dr. Winters nodded encouragingly. "That's significant progress from where you were 2 months ago." "Is it enough progress?" Marcus asked, the question that had been nagging at him. "These kids are counting on me. What if I freeze up? What if I have a flashback in front of everyone?" "Those are valid concerns," Dr. Winters acknowledged. "But consider this. You've been coaching these students for weeks, handling equipment that must trigger associations with your military service, discussing techniques that connect to your past experiences. Have you had any flashbacks during practice?" Marcus reflected on this. "No, a few moments of discomfort, but nothing severe." "Why do you think that is?" "Because I'm focused on them, not on myself," he realized as he spoke. "On what?" "They need what they're learning." Dr. Winters nodded. "Exactly. When we direct our energy outward toward helping others, it often diminishes the power our trauma holds over us. Not because the trauma isn't real, but because we're accessing different neural pathways, different emotional resources." She leaned forward slightly. "If you decide to participate in this fundraiser, we can work on specific techniques to manage anxiety. But I want you to know that I believe you're capable of this, Marcus, more capable than you realize." The session continued with practical discussions of anxiety management strategies and cognitive reframing techniques. By the time Marcus left, he felt more equipped to face the challenge before him, still apprehensive, but less overwhelmed by the prospect. That afternoon, he arrived at practice with a decision made. The students gathered around him, their anticipation palpable. "About the fundraiser," he began, his voice steadier than he had expected. "I'm in, but I have some conditions." Relief and excitement rippled through the group. Lily, ever the pragmatist, pulled out a notebook. "What conditions, Coach?" "First, this is about you, not me. The focus should be on what you've learned, what you've accomplished as a team. Second, I want each of you to participate in the speaking portion, not just the demonstration. Everyone has something valuable to contribute." The students exchanged uncertain glances at this stipulation. Public speaking ranked high on most teenagers' lists of dreaded activities. "And third," Marcus continued, "we do this right, professional, disciplined, which means practice, not just the shooting demonstration, but the entire presentation. Clear?" 8 heads nodded in unison, their expressions a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. "Good," Marcus concluded. "Then let's get to work." The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. In addition to their regular training, for the regional competition, the team now devoted hours to planning the fundraiser. They coordinated with the community center, designed flyers, practiced their demonstration routines, and, most challenging for many, prepared their speaking roles. Marcus worked with each student individually, drawing out their unique perspectives on what marksmanship had taught them. David, once painfully shy, spoke about finding confidence through mastering a difficult skill. Michael reflected on learning patience and the value of deliberate practice. Lily articulated the parallels between breath control in shooting and emotional regulation in daily life. Throughout it all, Marcus found himself increasingly comfortable in his mentorship role. The more he focused on helping his students articulate their experiences, the more he reconnected with the positive aspects of his own journey. The discipline, focus, and resilience that had served him well, not only in combat, but in surviving its aftermath. Colonel Harrison stopped by during one of their rehearsals, observing from the back of the room with evident satisfaction. "They've come a long way," he commented as Marcus joined him during a break. "All of you have." Marcus nodded, watching his team collaborate on adjusting the layout for their demonstration. "They're good kids, committed." "And their coach?" Harrison pressed, studying Marcus with his perceptive gaze. "Getting there," Marcus admitted. "One day at a time." Harrison clapped him on the shoulder. "That's all any of us can do, son. One day at a time." As the colonel departed, Emily Chen arrived carrying a garment bag. She had remained a steadfast presence in Marcus's life, their initial attorney-client relationship evolving into a genuine friendship. "Special delivery," she announced, holding up the bag. "For Saturday." Marcus eyed it suspiciously. "What's that?" "Your dress blues," Emily replied. "Colonel Harrison had them retrieved from storage, properly sized and pressed, with all your commendations." Marcus stared at the bag, a complex mix of emotions washing over him. His uniform, the tangible symbol of his service, his sacrifice, his former identity. He hadn't worn it since his discharge, hadn't even wanted to see it. "I can't," he began, his throat tightening. "You can," Emily countered gently. "You don't have to, but you can. Think about what it would mean to those kids to see you as you were, as you still are beneath it all. A Marine, a warrior, someone who faced the worst and survived." She held out the bag, her expression kind but firm. "Just consider it." After a moment's hesitation, Marcus accepted the garment bag, feeling its weight, physical and symbolic, in his hands. That night, alone in his apartment, a modest one-bedroom he had recently moved into with Colonel Harrison's assistance, Marcus finally unzipped the bag. The dark blue fabric emerged, immaculate and imposing. His fingers traced the gold buttons, the crisp lines, the ribbons and medals that told the story of his service in mute eloquence. Among them, the Navy Cross, awarded for his actions during the ambush that had saved Eleanor Matthews and 36 others. He had never worn it, had requested it be excluded from his official records. Colonel Harrison had obviously overridden that request. Marcus sat on the edge of his bed, uniform laid out beside him, and did something he had avoided for years. He allowed himself to remember. Not the violence or the loss that had dominated his nightmares, but the camaraderie, the sense of purpose, the moments of undeniable valor that had shaped him as much as the trauma had. Rodriguez's laugh, boisterous and infectious, Lieutenant Parker's steady leadership in the most chaotic situations, the quiet satisfaction of executing a difficult mission with precision and discipline, the knowledge that his skills had saved lives, had protected both his fellow Marines and innocent civilians caught in the crossfire of war. For so long, he had defined himself by what he had lost, by the damage he had sustained. Perhaps it was time to reclaim the other parts of his identity as well, the strength, the courage, the unwavering commitment to something larger than himself. Saturday dawned clear and crisp, autumn painting the town in vibrant oranges and reds. Marcus stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting the collar of his dress blues, with hands that trembled only slightly. The face that looked back at him was changed from the young Marine who had first donned this uniform, lines etched by hardship, eyes that had seen too much. But also, perhaps, a new steadiness, a hard-won wisdom that had been purchased at great cost. The community center was already bustling when he arrived. Colonel Harrison had worked his considerable network of contacts, ensuring a strong turnout of local officials, business leaders, and military veterans. The marksmanship team had transformed the main hall into an impressive venue, with a demonstration area, informational displays, and even a multimedia presentation showcasing their journey from struggling beginners to competitive marksmen. Lily spotted him first, her eyes widening at the sight of his uniform. She hurried over, practically vibrating with excitement. "Coach Riley, you look—" She searched for the right word. "Uncomfortable," Marcus supplied with a small smile. "Distinguished," she corrected firmly, "like the hero you are." Before Marcus could protest this description, the other students surrounded him, their reactions ranging from awestruck silence to enthusiastic exclamations about his awesome appearance. Their genuine admiration was both humbling and affirming. "Everyone ready?" he asked, deflecting attention from himself. Nods all around, though he could see the nervous energy coursing through them. He gathered them into a circle, just as they did before practice sessions. "Remember what we've talked about," he said quietly. "Focus on the process, not the outcome. One step at a time. You've all prepared for this, and you're ready. I'm proud of each of you, regardless of what happens today." Their faces reflected his words back to him, confidence bolstered by his faith in them, determination strengthened by his steady presence. The event began with Principal Watkins welcoming the assembled crowd and introducing the marksmanship team. The students proceeded to demonstrate their skills, executing precision drills that showcased their remarkable progress. Marcus stood to the side, observing with quiet pride as they performed flawlessly under pressure. Then came the speaking portion. One by one, the students stepped forward to share what marksmanship had taught them about life, about themselves. Their words were honest, sometimes faltering, but powerful in their authenticity. Parents watched with undisguised pride. Community members listened with growing appreciation for the discipline and focus these young people had developed. Finally, it was Marcus's turn. As he approached the microphone, he scanned the audience, finding familiar faces among the crowd. Eleanor Matthews, seated beside Colonel Harrison in the front row. Emily Chen, offering an encouraging smile. Dr. Winters, her presence a silent vote of confidence, and unexpectedly, Mr. and Mrs. Prescott, who had become unlikely allies after their initial skepticism. The room fell silent, expectation hanging in the air. Marcus took a deep breath, centering himself as he had taught his students to do before taking a shot. "My name is Staff Sergeant Marcus Riley, United States Marine Corps," he began, his voice steady despite the rapid beating of his heart. "I served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a scout sniper with the 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines." He paused, allowing himself a moment to feel the weight of those words, not as a burden, but as a foundation. "Many of you know parts of my story. The court case, the intervention of Judge Matthews, my struggles since returning home. What you may not know is that until 2 months ago, I believed my life was effectively over, that whatever value I once had was lost in Afghanistan, buried alongside the comrades who didn't make it back." The silence in the room deepened, the audience hanging on his every word. "Then I met these 8 extraordinary young people," he continued, gesturing toward his team. "They didn't see a broken veteran, a homeless failure, a burden on society. They saw a coach, a mentor, someone with knowledge worth sharing and skills worth learning." Marcus looked directly at his students, his voice gaining strength. "What they didn't realize is how much they were teaching me about resilience, the kind that gets you back on the firing line after a disappointing score, about community, supporting each other through challenges, celebrating each other's victories, about purpose, showing up day after day, not because it's easy, but because it matters." He squared his shoulders, the familiar weight of his uniform now a comfort rather than a constraint. "I've learned that trauma doesn't define you, it's just part of your story. That valor isn't limited to the battlefield. It's found in the courage to face each day, to try again, to reach out when every instinct tells you to withdraw. And most importantly, that healing isn't something that happens to you. It's something you actively participate in, one small choice at a time." Marcus looked out at the audience, allowing himself to fully inhabit this moment of connection. These students are raising funds today for a journey they've earned through dedication and hard work, but they're also demonstrating something far more valuable, that with proper guidance, with discipline and focus, with unwavering support for one another, extraordinary achievement is possible. He paused, his next words coming from a place of hard-won truth. I stand before you today not as someone who has conquered his demons, but as someone who has learned to face them. Not as someone who has all the answers, but as someone who keeps asking the right questions. Not as a hero, but as a fellow traveler on a difficult road. Marcus gestured toward the marksmanship team, standing tall and proud beside the demonstration area. The real heroes are these young people who welcomed a stranger into their circle and showed him that his worth wasn't measured by his past failures but by his present contributions. Who reminded him that while we can't change what happened to us, we can choose what happens next. He stepped back from the microphone, a signal that he had said what needed saying. The silence held for a heartbeat, then two, before the room erupted in applause. People rose to their feet, their response a wave of affirmation washing over Marcus and his team. Colonel Harrison was the first to approach, his handshake firm, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Well done, Staff Sergeant. Well done indeed." Others followed, parents expressing gratitude, veterans offering silent nods of understanding, community members pledging support for the team's journey to the state competition. Through it all, Marcus remained grounded, accepting their praise not for himself, but on behalf of his students. As the crowd dispersed toward the refreshment tables, Eleanor Matthews made her way to Marcus's side. "That wasn't so terrifying, was it?" she asked with a knowing smile. "Terrifying is relative," Marcus replied, but returned her smile with a small one of his own. "But worth it. For them. And for you," Eleanor added, her expression turning serious. "You know, when I first recognized you in my courtroom, I thought I was being given a chance to repay a debt, to help the man who had saved my life all those years ago." She glanced toward the marksmanship team, now surrounded by well-wishers and potential donors. "But I've come to realize it was never about repaying anything. It was about recognizing a fellow survivor, someone walking the same difficult path. Of reconciling who we were with who we are now." Marcus considered this perspective, finding truth in it. "Still walking," he acknowledged, "but maybe with a clearer destination in mind." As the fundraiser continued around them, Marcus observed his students with quiet pride. They moved through the crowd with newfound confidence, articulating their goals, demonstrating their skills, embodying the discipline and focus he had strived to instill in them. In their growth, he glimpsed his own, tentative but undeniable. The journey from that desperate man in an orange jumpsuit to the Marine in dress blues, standing tall before a supportive community, had not been linear or easy. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, days when the weight of the past threatened to crush his fragile progress. But there had also been breakthroughs. The first time he had laughed genuinely at one of Michael's jokes. The afternoon he had. Shared stories about Rodriguez with Lily. The morning he had awakened without the immediate crush of anxiety. The gradual lengthening of periods between nightmares. Small victories, perhaps, in the grand scheme of things. But as he had taught his students on the firing line, perfection wasn't the goal. Consistent progress was. One breath, one shot, one day at a time. The regional competition still loomed ahead, with its own challenges and opportunities. Beyond that, the state finals, a destination that now seemed attainable thanks to the community's generous response to the fundraiser. And beyond even that, a future that, while still uncertain, no longer seemed devoid of possibility. Marcus Riley was still finding his way home, but for the first time in years, he believed it was a journey he could complete. Not alone, as he had once thought necessary, but surrounded by a community that saw his value even when he couldn't see it himself. As the afternoon sun slanted through the high windows of the community center, casting long shadows across the polished floor, Marcus stood among his team, his uniform a testament to who he had been, his presence a promise of who he might yet become. The road ahead remained long and undoubtedly difficult, but he was walking it now, with purpose, with dignity, with hope. One step at a time. Progress, not perfection. And for today, that was enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.